November 18th, 1943, 2:47 a.m., North Atlantic Ocean, 200 miles west of Ireland. Kapitänleutnant Friedrich Schumann sits in the cramped control room of U-358, staring at a problem he's never seen before. His hydrophone operator, a 19-year-old from Hamburg named Klaus, has been reporting the same thing for the last 10 minutes. Contacts everywhere. Kapitän, I'm showing, I don't know, 30, 40, the screen is full. Schumann leans over the sonar display. The greenish phosphor screen shows exactly what Klaus described. Dozens of bright returns, some strong, some weak, all scattered around their position in a pattern that makes no sense. Direction? All directions, sir. They're surrounding us. Schumann feels his chest tighten. Surrounding them? That's impossible. The convoy they've been tracking has maybe 12 escorts, not 40. Are they moving? Klaus listens through his headphones, adjusts a dial, listens again. Some are, some aren't. And sir, the echoes are wrong. Wrong how? They're flickering. Like they're there, then they're not, then they're back again. I've never heard anything like it. Schumann has been hunting Allied convoys for 2 years. He's sunk 6 ships, survived 3 depth charge attacks. He knows the sound of destroyer propellers, the ping of enemy sonar, the metallic groan of a dying ship. This isn't any of those. Could it be mines? Asks his first officer standing behind them. Mines don't move, Schumann says. But even as he says it, he's not sure. What if the British developed some new weapon? Mobile mines, acoustic decoys. Diving officer, take us to 150 meters, silent running. The U-boat tilts downward. The crew moves like ghosts. No talking, no unnecessary movement. Even breathing feels too loud. At 150 meters, Klaus checks the sonar again. The contacts are still there. Kapitän, they followed us down. Schumann stares at the screen trying to understand what he's looking at. He doesn't know it yet, but what's confusing him, what's making his state-of-the-art sonar completely useless, is bacon grease, cooking fat, from breakfast, dumped into the ocean 5 hours ago by a 32-year-old cook from Minnesota who just wanted to empty his grease can. This is the story of how one man's kitchen accident became a weapon, and how breakfast helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. To understand why Oscar Peterson's discovery mattered, you need to understand just how bad things were in 1943. The North Atlantic wasn't just dangerous. It was a slaughterhouse. Between 1940 and 1943, German U-boats sank over 2,800 Allied merchant ships. 2,800! That's roughly 14 million tons of cargo, food, fuel, weapons, medicine, aircraft, tanks, everything Britain needed to survive and fight. And it wasn't just cargo that was lost. Over 30,000 merchant sailors died in the Atlantic, drowned in freezing water, burned alive when fuel oil ignited, killed by explosions, frozen to death in lifeboats. The Merchant Marine had the highest casualty rate of any service in World War II, higher than the infantry, higher than bomber crews. 1 in 4 merchant sailors who sailed the Atlantic didn't come back. 1 in 4. And the Germans were getting better at it. By 1943, U-boats hunted in packs. Wolf packs, they called them. 6, 8, sometimes 12 submarines working together. They'd spread out across the convoy routes, and when one U-boat spotted a target, it would call the others. Then they'd attack at night, surface attacks, firing torpedoes from multiple directions. The escorts couldn't protect every ship. There were too many U-boats and not enough destroyers. And even when escorts found a submarine, killing it was nearly impossible. Here's why. U-boats could dive to 200 meters, that's over 600 feet deep, deeper than most depth charges could reach before the water pressure made them detonate prematurely. They were small, hard to spot on radar, almost impossible to see visually unless they were on the surface, and they could hear everything. German hydrophones could detect a convoy from 20 miles away. The rumble of dozens of engines, the cavitation of propellers, the metallic groans of hulls flexing in heavy seas. By the time an escort got close enough to attack, the U-boat was already gone. Deeper, quieter. The Allies tried everything. Radar helped at night, but U-boats learned to dive as soon as they detected radar signals. Depth charges? Effective if you knew exactly where the submarine was, but dropping them randomly was just wasting ordnance. Hedgehog mortars? Better than depth charges, but still required precise targeting. Escort carriers? Helpful, but there weren't enough of them. The real problem was this. U-boats could hear the escorts coming long before the escorts could locate them. Imagine trying to catch someone in a dark building, except they can hear your footsteps from 3 floors away, and they can move silently. That's what hunting U-boats was like. By November 1943, the Allies were losing the Battle of the Atlantic. Prime Minister Churchill later admitted, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. Not the Luftwaffe bombing London, not German tanks rolling through France. U-boats. Because without the Atlantic convoys, Britain would starve, and without Britain, there'd be no way to invade Europe." The Allies needed a breakthrough, and they got one. In the galley of a Liberty ship from a man who'd never finished high school. Oscar Peterson was born in Duluth, Minnesota in 1911. His father worked on the docks of Lake Superior. His mother died when Oscar was 9. Oscar dropped out of school at 16 to help support his family. He worked odd jobs, loading cargo, cleaning fish. Eventually, he found work as a cook at a diner in downtown Duluth. He was good at it. Not fancy cooking, not restaurant cooking, just solid, reliable, working man food. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, hot coffee. The kind of breakfast that sticks to your ribs when you're about to spend 10 hours doing hard labor. Oscar learned the rhythms of the kitchen, how to time everything so the eggs finished exactly when the toast popped, how to save bacon grease because it made everything taste better, how to keep working even when the grill was smoking and the orders were piling up and the diner was packed with loud, impatient men who'd been working since 4 a.m. He wasn't ambitious, didn't dream of owning a restaurant. He just wanted steady work and enough money to help his father. And then Pearl Harbor happened. December 7th, 1941. Oscar was 30 years old, technically too old for the draft. He could have stayed at the diner, sat out the war. He didn't. 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Oscar walked into the Merchant Marine recruiting office in Duluth. "I'm a cook," he told the recruiter. "I hear you need cooks." They did. The Merchant Marine was expanding fast. Liberty ships were being built at a rate of 3 per day. Each one needed a crew, and every crew needed someone to feed them. Oscar signed up. 6 weeks of training in New York, basic seamanship, firefighting, abandoned ship drills. And then his assignment, SS Richard Holvey, a brand new Liberty ship, fresh from the shipyard in Baltimore. Oscar reported aboard in March 1942. The SS Richard Holvey was 441 feet long, displacing 14,000 tons when fully loaded. It had a top speed of 11 knots, which is about as fast as a riding lawnmower. Oscar's station was the galley, a cramped, hot steel box below the main deck, right next to the engine room. One coal-fired stove, two burners, a small oven, a metal sink, a few pots and pans. That was it. His job? Feed 44 men. 3 meals a day, every day, no days off. Breakfast, 6 a.m. Lunch, noon. Dinner, 6 p.m. In port, it was manageable. At sea, it was hell. The North Atlantic is one of the roughest oceans in the world. 30-foot waves are common. 50-foot waves happen. The ship would pitch and roll constantly. Try cooking when everything is sliding. Pots full of boiling water sliding across the stove, hot grease splashing, knives rolling off the counter, your feet slipping on the wet steel deck. And you're doing this while wearing a life vest, because if a torpedo hits, you have maybe 60 seconds to get topside before the ship goes down. Oscar learned fast. He developed a system. He'd wedge pots into corners, tie down anything that could move. He'd start cooking early so he could work slower, more carefully. And he saved the bacon grease. This might seem like a small detail, but it mattered to Oscar. Bacon grease was valuable. You could use it to fry eggs, to roast potatoes, to grease pans. During wartime rationing, you couldn't waste anything. So every morning, after cooking bacon for 44 men, Oscar would pour the leftover grease into a metal can. He'd let it cool, then he'd store it in the galley cupboard. One can would last about a week. Then it would be full, and he'd need to empty it. Standard procedure was simple. Take it up to the main deck and dump it over the side. The Navy didn't want grease in the bilge. Fire hazard. So overboard it went. Oscar had done this hundreds of times. November 14th, 1943 was supposed to be just another day. November 14th, 1943. The Richard Hovey was part of convoy ON 210, outbound from New York to Liverpool. 73 ships, 12 escorts. They were 3 days into the crossing. The weather was typical for November. Cold, overcast, rough seas. No attacks yet, but everyone was tense. U-boats had been active lately. 2 convoys had been hit hard in the past month, and intelligence reports suggested a wolf pack was operating somewhere in their path. The crew of the Richard Hovey didn't talk about it much. What was there to say? Either you got torpedoed or you didn't. Worrying didn't help. Oscar's routine was the same as always. 4 a.m. Wake up. Check the stove. Get the fire going. 4:30 a.m. Start cooking breakfast. 30 pounds of bacon. That's what it took to feed 44 men, plus a few extra portions for the watch officers. Bacon first. While it's cooking, start the coffee. Big pots. Strong and black. Then eggs. Scrambled. Faster that way. Toast? Forget it. The toaster broke a week ago. Bread with butter would have to do. By 5:30, breakfast was ready. But there was a problem. The grease can was full, overflowing actually. Oscar had been meaning to empty it for 2 days, but kept forgetting. He couldn't leave it there. If the ship rolled hard, the can would tip. Hot grease all over the galley. Fire waiting to happen. He grabbed the can. It was heavy. Maybe 2 gallons of congealed fat. Oscar climbed the ladder to the main deck. It was still dark. No moon. The only light came from the dim red battle lanterns. Red light doesn't ruin night vision. Important when you're watching for submarines. The wind was cold, maybe 40 degrees. The spray from the waves felt like ice. Oscar walked to the starboard rail. He could see the other ships in the convoy, dark shapes, No lights. Radio silence. Just dozens of ghost ships moving through the black water. He leaned over the rail and poured. The grease hit the water with a soft splash. And something strange happened. Instead of just sinking, the grease spread. Oscar could see it in the dim light, a slick, shimmering, growing larger, maybe 20 feet across, maybe more. He watched it for a moment. Then he shrugged, turned around, and went back to the galley. He had eggs to cook. At 7:15 a.m., Oscar was cleaning up from breakfast. That's when the alarm sounded. Not the abandoned ship alarm, the action stations alarm. Different sound, means possible attack, everyone to battle stations, but don't panic yet. Oscar heard shouting up on deck. The Richard Hovey's engines changed pitch. They were turning. Hard to port. Through the galley's small porthole, Oscar saw one of the convoy's escorts, the destroyer USS Bory, racing toward them. Fast. Way too fast for a friendly approach. The Bory's sonar was pinging. You could hear it even through the hull, that distinctive ping, ping, ping. The crew of the Richard Hovey scrambled. The gun crews ran to their stations. Men grabbed life vests. Oscar stayed in the galley. His battle station was there. If the ship got hit, he was supposed to close the watertight doors and wait for orders. The Bory circled them once. Then again. Then it stopped. The sonar went silent. 5 minutes passed. Then, all clear. False alarm. Oscar heard the crew muttering, "What the hell was that about?" Later that morning, the Richard Hovey's radio operator told everyone what happened. The Bory had detected a strong sonar contact, multiple echoes, very close to the Richard Hovey. They thought it was a U-boat, maybe preparing to fire. But when they investigated, there was nothing there. Equipment malfunction, probably. Sonar glitch. These things happen. Most of the crew forgot about it by lunchtime. But Oscar didn't, because he remembered something. The grease slick. He dumped the grease around 5:30 a.m. The Bory detected the phantom contact around 7:15 a.m. Almost 2 hours later. Coincidence? Maybe. But Oscar had grown up on Lake Superior. He knew how oil behaved on water. It spread, it floated, sometimes it lingered for hours. What if the sonar had bounced off the grease slick? Now, that's stupid, Oscar thought. Sonar detects submarines, not cooking grease. But the idea stuck in his head. That night, lying in his bunk, Oscar couldn't stop thinking about it. Oil and water don't mix. The grease would float on top, creating a layer. And Oscar knew that sound travels differently through different materials. He wasn't a scientist, didn't know the physics, but he'd spent enough time on boats to know that weird things happened with water and sound. He decided to test it. 2 days later, November 16th, Oscar waited until 2 a.m., the middle of the night watch, when most of the crew was asleep. He heated up some leftover bacon grease in the galley, about a quart, got it nice and hot. Then he went up to the main deck. The deck officer on watch was a young ensign named Roberts, 22 years old, on his first convoy. Oscar approached him. "Sir, I need to ask you something strange." Roberts looked at him. "What?" "I'm going to pour some hot grease into the water, and I want you to watch the sonar. See if it picks anything up." Robert stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You want me to... what?" Oscar explained. The grease he'd dumped 2 days ago, the Bory's false contact, his theory. Roberts was skeptical, but it was a boring watch, and honestly, he was curious. Fine. I'll radio the Bori. Tell them we're testing something. If the sonar operator sees anything, I'll let you know. Oscar walked to the rail. He poured the grease. The hot fat hit the cold water with a hiss. Steam rose. The grease spread into a slick, just like before. Oscar went back to Roberts. Now we wait. 5 minutes passed. Then Roberts' radio crackled. Richard Hovey, this is Bori. We're showing a contact, bearing 085, range 200 yards, weak return, intermittent. Advise you check your position. Roberts looked at Oscar. His eyes were wide. That's where you dumped the grease. Oscar nodded. Let's try it again, different spot. Roberts was fully engaged now. He radioed the Bori, told them to keep watching. Oscar went back to the galley, heated up more grease. This time he poured it off the port side. 4 minutes later, Bori reporting contact bearing 275, range 180 yards. Port side, exactly where Oscar had dumped the second batch. Roberts called Oscar back to the bridge. What the hell is going on? I think, Oscar said slowly, grease fools sonar. Roberts didn't understand how, neither did Oscar. But they'd just proved it. Twice. We need to report this, Roberts said. When convoy ON210 reached Liverpool on November 21st, Oscar's report made it to the desk of Commander James Sutherland, Royal Navy, assigned to the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division. Sutherland read it twice. Then he read it again. His first thought, this is insane. His second thought, but what if it's true? The war wasn't going well. U-boats were sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them. Every idea, no matter how crazy, deserved investigation. Sutherland assembled a team, 3 scientists from Cambridge, 2 sonar experts, an acoustic engineer. They visited the Richard Hovey on November 28th. Oscar met them at the gangway. 6 men in naval uniforms and civilian clothes, carrying cases full of equipment. Mr. Peterson? One of them asked. That's me. We're here about your bacon grease. They set up equipment, hydrophones, sonar transceivers, recording devices. Oscar showed them his process. He cooked bacon in the galley, saved the grease, heated it until it was liquid again. Then they all went up to the deck. The ship was still in port, but that didn't matter. The scientists wanted to test the principle. Oscar poured the grease into Liverpool Harbor. The scientists watched their instruments, and they saw it immediately. Strong sonar return, multiple echoes, coming from the area where the grease had spread. Dr. Alan Morrison, the lead scientist, stared at the oscilloscope screen. This is extraordinary! They ran the test 5 more times. Different amounts of grease, different water temperatures, different pouring methods. Every time, sonar echoes. But why? One of the younger scientists asked. Grease is just organic matter. Why would it reflect sound? Dr. Morrison thought for a moment. Show me exactly how you pour it, he said to Oscar. Oscar demonstrated. Hot grease meeting cold water. Morrison watched carefully. It's not staying as one mass, he said. Look, it's breaking into droplets. He was right. When the hot grease hit the cold water, it didn't form a smooth film. Instead, it shattered into thousands of tiny droplets, each one maybe a millimeter across. Those droplets, he continued, they're denser than water, so they sink. But they sink slowly, and as they sink, they're suspended at different depths. So what? Another scientist asked. So, sound waves travel through water at about 1,500 meters per second. But when a sound wave hits a boundary,
Water to air, water to metal, water to anything with a different density, some of that sound reflects back. Grease has a different density than water, someone said. Exactly. Each droplet creates a tiny reflection. One droplet, negligible. But thousands of droplets suspended in a cloud? That's like having thousands of tiny mirrors in the water. And to a sonar operator, Morrison said, it looks like a solid object. The scientists ran more tests. They measured the size of the droplets, the depth at which they suspended, how long they remained in the water column before finally dispersing. Results: a gallon of hot grease poured into cold seawater created a cloud of droplets that persisted for 2–3 hours. The cloud covered an area roughly 30 meters in diameter. Sonar reflections from the cloud were strong enough to resemble a submarine or a mine. Dr. Morrison wrote his report that night. Subject: acoustic countermeasures using lipid suspension. That's what he called it, lipid suspension. Oscar called it bacon grease. Morrison's report reached the Admiralty on December 3rd. By December 5th, a classified project had been initiated, Operation Grease Trap. The goal? Weaponize Oscar Peterson's discovery. The problem was scale. Oscar had proved that a gallon of grease could fool sonar. Great. But in a real combat situation, you'd need more than a gallon. You'd need to create a massive cloud of false contacts, something big enough to completely confuse a U-boat. The Admiralty convened a meeting. Scientists, naval officers, even a few representatives from the Ministry of Food, since they controlled rationing and knew where cooking fat was being produced. The solution they came up with was brilliantly simple. A canister. A sealed metal drum, 50 pounds of animal fat and vegetable oil inside, mixed with a chemical agent that would make it disperse slowly. An escort ship could carry dozens of these canisters. When a U-boat was detected, the escort would drop them into the water. The canisters would sink to a preset depth, say 50 meters, then burst open. Hot fat meeting cold water at pressure, creating a massive cloud of acoustic clutter. To a U-boat, it would look like the ocean just filled up with solid objects. They built the first prototype in January 1944. Field tests began in February, and by March, grease canisters were being deployed to convoy escorts in the North Atlantic. They came with specific instructions. Use when U-boat is detected, but exact location is unknown. Drop 6 to 10 canisters in a pattern around suspected location. Wait 5 minutes for cloud to form. Then attack with depth charges while U-boat is blind. The first operational use was March 14, 1944. Convoy HX-280. U-boat 358 had been tracking HX-280 for 2 days. Kapitelleutnant Schumann was patient. He'd wait for nightfall, then surface, attack from the convoy's flank. But at 1800 hours, his hydrophony operator reported something. "Captain, I'm detecting... I don't know what this is." Schumann looked at the sonar screen. Contacts, dozens of them, all around the convoy. Are those escorts? "I don't think so, sir. The returns are wrong. They're not moving like ships." Schumann watched the screen. The contacts weren't moving at all. They were just there. Mines? Maybe. Schumann hesitated. If those were mines, surfacing would be suicide. "Take us deeper, 150 meters." The U-boat descended. The contacts were still there. "What's our battery status?" Schumann asked. 60%, sir." "Not great. They'd need to surface within a few hours to recharge." But Schumann couldn't surface, not with those contacts all around them. "We wait," he said. What Schumann didn't know was that HMS Starling one of the convoy's escorts, had dropped 8 grease canisters in a wide pattern around U-boat 358's suspected location. The canisters had worked exactly as designed. U-boat 358 was now sitting in the middle of an acoustic fog. Their sonar was useless, and HMS Starling had a working fix on their position. At 1845 hours, Starling began its attack run. Depth charges, 24 of them set to detonate at 150 meters. The first pattern bracketed U-boat 358 perfectly. The second pattern scored a direct hit. U-boat 358's pressure hole cracked. Water rushed in. Schumann tried to surface, but it was too late. The submarine was already sinking. At 1903 hours, U-boat 358 reached crush depth and imploded. 47 men, all lost. Grease canisters were used 5 more times in March and April 1944. 2 more U-boats were sunk with their help, U-boat 377 on March 28th and U-boat 441 on April 11th. In all 3 cases, the U-boats were blinded by the acoustic clutter. They couldn't surface, couldn't maneuver, couldn't escape. The German Navy never figured out what was happening. After the war, when U-boat commanders learned the truth, they were furious. You're telling me we lost boats to cooking fat? Yes, they did. Oscar Peterson stayed a cook for the rest of the war. The Royal Navy offered to commission him as an officer. He declined. "I'm a cook," he said. "That's what I do." The Admiralty wanted to give him a medal. He declined that, too. "I just dumped some grease over the side," he said. "That's not medal-worthy." But the crew of the Richard Hovey knew. They knew Oscar had discovered something important, something that saved lives. From November 1943 until the end of the war, Oscar got special treatment, extra bacon rations, a newer, better stove, fresh coffee beans when everyone else was drinking the ersatz stuff. And every morning, without fail, the crew made sure Oscar got the best cut of bacon for himself. Oscar made 14 more Atlantic crossings. The Richard Hovey was never attacked. In May 1945, the war in Europe ended. Oscar returned to Minnesota. He went back to work at the same diner in Duluth, cooking eggs and bacon, making coffee, same job, same routine. He never talked about the war much. When people asked what he did, he'd just say, "I was a cook on a merchant ship." That was technically true. What he didn't mention was that his accidental discovery had helped sink 3 U-boats and saved countless lives. Oscar died in 1978, age 67, heart attack. His obituary in the Duluth newspaper mentioned he was a veteran but didn't give details. Most of his neighbors never knew. But in the British Naval Archives, there's a file, classified until 1995. Operation Grease Trap, acoustic countermeasures using lipid suspension. And on the first page, handwritten, original discovery, Oscar Peterson, civilian cook, SS Richard Hovey, November 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic was won with technology. Radar, sonar, hedgehog mortars, escort carriers, code breaking. But also with bacon grease. And that's the beautiful part of Oscar's story. The Germans built their entire U-boat strategy around technological superiority. Better submarines, better torpedoes, better sonar. They assumed the Allies would respond with technology, electronic countermeasures, better depth charges, faster escorts. What they didn't expect was someone dumping cooking fat into the ocean. It's such a simple idea that it sounds stupid, but it worked. Not because it was sophisticated, but because it was unexpected. And that's the lesson. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most complex. It's the one nobody sees coming. Oscar Peterson wasn't a genius.
Wasn't an engineer, wasn't a scientist. He was a cook who noticed something weird and thought, I wonder. That curiosity, that willingness to test a crazy idea, helped win the war. How many lives did Oscar's discovery save? Hard to say exactly. Maybe a few dozen, maybe a few hundred. Every U-boat sunk meant convoys that made it through, ships that delivered their cargo, sailors who came home. And it all started because a cook needed to empty a grease can. The next time you cook bacon, think about Oscar. And remember, sometimes the most important discoveries happen in the most ordinary places. In kitchens, in workshops, in garages, by ordinary people asking extraordinary questions.
Thanks for watching this story from World War II Vault. If you want more tales of unlikely heroes, unexpected solutions, and the hidden stories that changed history, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next story from the Vault.